see you guys in the dark.
The story I'm about to tell is a little difficult for me to talk about, for two reasons. One is the main part took place when I was around 4 or 5 years old, which makes it difficult to remember most details surrounding the story. The other reason is this story makes me feel uneasy to even really think about. And this might be only the third time that I've ever really told it to anyone in full. So, quick background to the story is that I was born and raised in an extremely close, big family. We all lived within a mile from each other around a large park in a small Texas town. Unrelated fun fact for those horror fans out there, this park is the present-day location of the majority of the town that dreaded sundown murders. Now, my family was jam-packed full of aunts and uncles, and I'd say I saw them all at least once a week for my entire childhood. I can't stress enough how close we all were growing up, and how trusted they all were, as it plays an important part of this story. So the story comes up recently between my older brother, my mother, and I, because I opened up about a series of nightmares I've been basically plagued with for as long as I can remember. These nightmares are always very similar, and basically always consist of me, as a small child, in my childhood home, attempting to escape my house while something horrible chases me. The something is never actually visibly seen, but is more like I sense this massive looming person reaching out at me from the dark, and it always catches me before I can get outside. This usually results in me waking up in a sweat. These dreams always seem to center around those very vague, yet oddly detailed memories of a babysitter I once had. Here's where it gets odd. These memories I have are almost like dreams. I very specifically remember the details of what was happening, and the feeling I had during, but everything else was just about out of reach. That goes for the babysitter herself as well. I remember it was a white female who was middle-aged, but I can't for the life of me recall her face. In my memories, it's like I never really got a good look at her. The two specific incidences I remember were not happy ones. The first memory I have is that whenever I would get in trouble, for I have no memory of, I would be forced to sit outside on the back porch in shorts and a t-shirt during winter time. I remember because I would shiver and just sit there quietly, scared. Complaining would only cause more problems. The second memory was even worse for me. The babysitter loved to play this game she made up. She would turn off all the lights in the house and go hide deep in one of the back rooms. I was left in the front room and told that if I wanted food or to watch TV, I had to find her first. I never had any idea where she was hiding, and if I ever found her, she would jump out screaming like a mad woman and then chase me. I remember her laughing at my fear. I remember often being so frozen with terror that I would sit on the ground near the front door, too scared to go find her. No matter how long I waited, she would never come out of hiding, no matter how hungry I got. I specifically remember this one time very well. I was so little and scared. I was whimpering as I slowly built up bravery to walk the back hallway looking for her. My hunger felt deadly at this point, and I needed to go find her. I checked the bathrooms, bedrooms, and closets. Nothing. She was nowhere to be seen. I remember standing in my parents' bedroom, trying to figure out where she would be, just when I saw her. She was a dark shape under the big bed, peeking at me from under the bed skirt. We stared at each other, unmoving. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew that she was smiling at me. She was like a crazy, feral animal under there. I remember her sliding herself along the floor so fast, I screamed and turned to run as she made it to her feet. And then the memory goes dark. I don't know what happened after that, and that scares me just as much as the memory I do have of the event. I never shared these memories because they seemed so distant, and I often wondered if they were even real. One day when I was in my 20s, I mentioned the nightmares to my mother and brother when we were just sitting around talking during one of the weeks where my brother and I were home from college. We often would do this to tell funny stories and remember all of the kids we knew from long before. Then I decided to ask my mom about the babysitter. She seemed confused and told me that she never hired babysitters for either I or my brother because of how big and close my family was and how protective my mom was of us. She never trusted anyone but family to watch us. My aunts and grandmother were the absolute opposite of the woman that I remember. Loving, kind, fun, and treated me like their own children. I couldn't imagine them doing those things to me. My mom genuinely seemed confused, but also slightly worried like a mother would be when hearing such a horrible story. She told me that she truly couldn't even begin to imagine who I was talking about. With her certainty, and with the memories being so vague in important places, I decided I must have imagined it all. Then my brother brought it up again the next day when we were driving together. "Yeah, I remember that," he said, with some concern in his voice. "Like, I remember seeing you get taken outside and being forced to sit there, and I thought that it was so horrible. I don't know why we never told anyone." He too had no memory of who the woman was, but he remembers feeling defenseless over the whole thing. He only had vague memories of the horrible game that she would play, but pointed out how he has absolutely no memory of her, ever targeting him with her temperament. He remembers the events as if it were an audience member. He did, however, remember things that I didn't. This included that I often got in trouble because I would often use my imagination to tell stories, and that the babysitter would often get mad when she realized that it was not true. This resulted in me getting kicked out of the house. I just wanted to point out that my brother is only 1 year older than I am, so he too would have been very little. I have thought about bringing it up to my mom, but I honestly trust that she has no idea who I am talking about, and I don't want to make her feel horrible about something so long ago that she clearly has no memory of. I just wish that I could understand what the hell happened, and who the hell she was. My brother never brought it up again, but he told me at the same time that he always played that memory off as being so young, and just misunderstanding whatever was happening. All I do know is, babysitter from my nightmares, I really don't want to see you ever again, not even in my sleep. I don't even know where to start with this story. I was kind of young at the time, around 7 or 8, but old enough to know what was going on. I lived in a pretty decent neighborhood, but my family was in the process of moving. There was a large mixture of families with children and retired seniors living on the street. There was a neighborhood babysitter who'd take care of my younger sister when she was too young to go to school. She also happened to babysit me on multiple occasions. She was always kind of rude, a pudgy lady with 2 annoying sons, and a very weird husband. A lot of kids got taken care of by her, so my parents trusted her to take care of us. Everything was somewhat normal, except for the fact that she was kind of rude to anybody that wasn't her kid. Her kids were pretty misbehaved. They were always fighting, hitting each other with plastic swords, and screaming at the top of their lungs. At one point, the younger toddlers had a nap, and she forced all the children to sit in a corner and be quiet, besides her children. Odd behavior for a babysitter, but we never thought much of it. Another thing to mention, that she took naps while babysitting. As in, she didn't pay attention to any of the kids. She just shooed them away and fell asleep. She was also notorious for giving her sons chocolate milk and telling others that they had to have water. My sister and I tried to ignore it, but eventually we were kind of annoyed. My sister had a loud mouth, so she told my mom about how she treats the kids, versus how she treats her own children. I'd also like to acknowledge that my sister had just turned 4, so she wasn't great with her words. My mom was angry that the babysitter did that, but she let it slide, as we were moving in a month, and she didn't know if we were being completely honest. The house we moved to is the house that I spent a large majority of my childhood and teen years in. Things were normal once we transitioned into the new house, until we got the calls. We changed our phone numbers, so we weren't sure how the babysitter and her husband found it so quickly. She called every day, saying that we needed to pay her and that we owed her money. She was just angry that we moved and were currently on the lookout for a babysitter that was closer to home. My parents received these calls every day, and they consisted of a babysitter or her husband screaming, which meant that I could hear the voicemails or calls quite clearly. They kept harassing us, and my parents grew agitated and worried. It all ended one night at around 10 p.m. when my sister and I woke up to the sound of banging on the front door. It continued for a good 10 minutes, and it was very loud. My sister was freaked out, so I decided to go see if my parents were awake. They were. They were just opening their eyes, kind of confused as to what was going on. My dad told my mom to stay upstairs, and he foolishly went downstairs to get the door. As I stood at the railing nervously, my sister stayed in the bedroom because she was unaware of what was actually happening. When he opened the door, I felt sick and terrified. There was my babysitter and her husband, who managed to find not only our address, but also our phone number. My husband started screaming at the top of his lungs, yelling, "You owe us money! Pay us!" and shaking a knife. Yes, he had a knife in his hand. My dad told him that we didn't and warned him to leave, unless he wanted the cops to be called. He didn't care. My dad went to close the door, but he stuck his foot in it and attempted to get inside. My babysitter was also yelling, but I couldn't hear what she had said. We had a phone upstairs, so my mother quietly called the cops as my dad struggled to get the door closed. Once he did, the banging and screaming continued. They wouldn't leave our property. I was freaked out, so I started crying. My sister saw me crying, and she did the same thing. Long story short, about an hour later they left, and the cops arrived, having just missed them. My parents knew their info based on the fact that they babysat us, so it wasn't hard to track them, and they were arrested. I always wondered if their children were home alone or at a sleepover, especially at a time so late. Regardless, they were released a few days later, but were not allowed to step foot near our house. I'm not sure if the woman still babysits, but if she does, I feel terrible for those kids. We never really knew what their intentions were that night. My dad saw the knife and knew that they were up to no good. All I can say is, psychotic babysitter and her husband, I really don't want you to mess with my family ever again. This happened ages ago when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13, living in the countryside, and was babysitting most of the children in my street, 20 houses max. This particular neighbor would love to go out on Wednesday, because there was this Latin dance class going on in a nearby bar. So I was used to babysit for her, and she'd always come back very late. That specific night, the oldest of 3 was a little difficult, and didn't want to go to sleep. I struggled with putting him to bed, and afterwards was tired. I studied my math a little bit, and around midnight decided to take a nap until the kid's mom came back. A few minutes after falling asleep, I hear someone frantically knocking on the door, trying to open it. It was the neighbor with her 2 young children. It was winter, and we easily had 3 feet of snow, and temperature outside must have been around 21 degrees Celsius. The kids only had their pajamas on, and an unzipped jacket. She was wearing jeans, a wool shirt, and winter boots. I could see the fear in her eyes as I struggled unlocking the door. I panicked, and had her walk all the way around the house to the patio door. When she got in, she quickly told me to bring all the children downstairs, turn off the lights, and not to answer the door to anyone. The kids kept asking, "Who is Daddy going to kill? Who is Daddy going to kill?" And she kept muting them, saying nothing was going to happen, and then she left. I woke up all of the kids, brought them all in the playroom in the basement, and asked them to play silently. The oldest, who had been long asleep, was asking what was going on, and I kept telling him that it was a special occasion where he could play late with his neighbor friends. I calmed the other 2 down, telling no one was going to die. But in my mind, my time had already come. I could see myself being shot while trying to protect the kids. I was trying to figure out how to stay alive, or at least how to keep them alive. I wasn't trying to be a hero, but I was trying to convince myself that if I had come down to that, I would have to try and protect them. I called 911, but started shaking and crying so much I didn't know what to do. It was an answering machine asking if I wanted the cops, the ambulance, or the firefighters. I called my mom, told her quickly what was going on, and she called the cops and joined me. As she got in the driveway, the neighbor's husband was walking up the street with a huge axe. My mom got into the house, locked the door, and cracked open a window and asked what was going on while he was approaching the house. He asked her to come out and confront him, thinking that it was his wife. My mother then explained to him she was the babysitter's mother and came after getting a worried 13-year-old's call. He then asked us to give him his wife, but he didn't know where she was. He argued a little with my mom, but she was so calm, it kind of calmed him down. I still admire her for that night. After about 10 to 15 minutes of arguing, he walked back home carrying his axe and a few seconds later, his wife knocked on the patio door behind the house and came in. She was crying and was apologizing to my mother for the whole situation. She thought her neighbor was home, not the babysitter. My mother asked me to go check on the kids while she was taking care of the wife. A few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived, and they came in, spent time with the wife, asking tons of questions, then me and my mother. In the meantime, the woman I was babysitting for arrived. They interviewed her too. They asked me and my mom if we were ready to go to court if the woman pressed charges against her husband. Surprisingly, she never did. Turns out she had just announced to her firefighter husband that she was sleeping with her boss in order to get a raise because they were struggling financially. He got his firefighter axe and said he was going to kill the bastard, but she wanted to stop him. That's why she brought the kids and left. I was always scared of him afterwards, and whenever I saw his children, I would check to see if they had any signs of violence, but they moved about 6 months later, and we moved 2 years after that. Two years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these 2 ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m., and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when somebody knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over. They both told me no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so that I can't see his face. Immediately, I'm like, nope, and don't say anything. Start pacing around because I don't want to give him any inclination that we're inside. A couple of minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains, and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later, and the moms get back home. They ask me how everything was, and I say that the kids were great, but somebody had come to the door. They asked me what time, and I say around 8 o'clock, and one of the moms starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through your window." They didn't think that it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were, but in retrospect, we're almost positive it was me he was looking at through that window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later on. Apparently nothing strange ever happened after that, but I'm just really glad I didn't open that door because I have a feeling in my gut it would have been really, really bad. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night, and I'll see you next time.